Merry Christmas from the 302. I'm Jackie Ferris. This week on the show, we have a historical interpretation of Charles Dickens' classic Oliver Twist. If you don't know the story, this is our gift to you. Get ready, the 302 is headed your way. Hey everyone, we are in historic Odessa talking about an Oliver Twist Christmas, and I'm joined now by one of our favorites when we come to a visit, Debbie Buxton, to tell us a little bit more about all there is to see when you come here. Debbie, thank you so much for joining us.
Jackie, thank you so much for coming back to visit us.
Well, it's always a good time at Historic Odessa, but let's talk a little bit about what you're doing for Christmas. Merry Christmas, by the way.
Merry Christmas to you.
Every year for the past 34 years, you do something special that has a link to literacy. Talk to us about that.
We do. The families that lived in our buildings were Quaker and didn't celebrate Christmas. But the town of Odessa is kind of a Christmas town. The buildings are all lit with lights. The women's club, the local women's club, has a tour of private homes on the first Saturday in December. And people come from all over to visit us and see our beautiful wreaths on the doors and really the spectacular Christmas decorations. And so to be a part of that in the spirit of community partnership, we decided 34 years ago to make a complete departure from our normal interpretation and to recreate a piece of classic literature in one of our buildings. So every year for 34 years, we've recreated a story. This year, we're doing Oliver Twist, which was last done in Odessa 24 years ago. So this is the first time in 24 years we've repeated this particular story. But of course, Charles Dickens was a prolific 19th century author. He was born in 1812 and he died in 1870. And he wrote Oliver Twist, or The Parish Boy's Progress, which is the full title of the book, in 1834. It was a spectacular hit. It came out in serial form over the course of a couple of years. So, and people read it, couldn't wait to get their hands on the next serial edition of it.
Now, while it's about orphans and child labor and criminals, it's indicative of what was happening at the time, told in a I guess, not a humorous, but a kind of interesting way by Dickens.
Oh, absolutely. Dickens shed light on the issues of the day, the things that were important at the time, and he sort of removed the sugarcoating from things and showed the reality of what was happening. And Dickens himself was in a workhouse as a child. So these issues hit home with him and they were important to him.
So let's talk a little bit about where we are now, the beginning of the story. Talk to us a little bit about, how you're able to use things that you have in your archives to really tell this story.
We do. We select things from our collections that we can bring together in a new way to interpret these wonderful stories. And this particular room represents the parish mission, which is the first place Oliver Twist is as an orphan child. And we've got the big porridge pot back here. This is a copper apple butter pot. But if you recall the story, Oliver dares to ask for more. Please, sir, may I have more? And we have the children at the table next to me eating their thin gruel, and then we have the gentleman who sort of runs the parish mission house and his wife, who are enjoying all kinds of wonderful, delectable treats over here in the corner. So it drew a real contrast between the people that were running things and the children that actually were the recipients. So
when people come and they check out this room, just laid out, it's really amazing. You actually have people that are dressed in period attire to help facilitate the story. Is that right?
Well, no, not exactly. We do have costumed interpreters here, but they're not here every day. So, they're here for special programs and special events. Christmas in Odessa, there will be costumed interpreters all over town, so it's fun. And it does bring the story to life. It brings history alive. And what we want to do is we want to encourage children to read. We want to encourage literacy programs. And this is just a good way of doing it.
And when we come back, we're going to check out another chapter of the Oliver Twist Christmas interpretation at Historic Odessa. We'll be right back.
I'm Rabbi Nick Renner, and it was a joy, as we say in Hebrew, machaya, a life-giving thing, to celebrate and talk about Hanukkah with 302.
Welcome back. We have moved into the hallway of the Corbett Sharp House in historic Odessa. I'm joined by Debbie Buxton, and we're talking about an Oliver Twist Christmas. Now, this is what people see when they walk in, and it's a showstopper. It's decorated. It's amazing.
Well, we've recreated a London street here in the magnificent hallway of the Corbett House. So you can imagine being on a London street surrounded by fabulous architecture. And, the hallway just lends itself to that. We've got period clothing hanging from clotheslines stretched across the street, as it might have been in, mid-19th century London. This is also the spot where Oliver Twist first encounters the Artful Dodger, and who promises to give him shelter and teach him a few tricks that probably he would have been better off not knowing. So he takes him back to Fagin's den, and they train Oliver for several days to become a pickpocket. And it is on this street where he encounters Mr. Brownlow. He picks Mr. Brownlow's pocket and steals a silk scarf, while Mr. Brownlow is looking at books at the booksellers.
And of course, you have several books from the archives that you brought out to kind of tell the story. Let's talk a little bit about, the creative force behind this, the gentleman who kind of brought this to life, and the special accolade that he has been bestowed.
Oh, well, I'm filling in for our Brian Miller today. And Brian pulled all of this together. He's very talented. He is our associate curator and does this each year and has been doing it for Historic Odessa Foundation for the last 17 years. So he's done 17 of these fabulous exhibits. Brian applied to the White House to be selected to decorate, to be one of the people that decorates the White House. And this year he was selected. They select only one person from each state, so it's a real honor. And we're so proud of him. We're so excited. And that's where he is today. It's why he's not doing this interview.
Well, there you go. And when you look around, you can see why he was chosen, just because of the different things that really bring the story to life.
Yes, he has an eye for detail. He understands our collection and the history of it and what will work in each of these vignettes. He pulls it together beautifully. I mean, he's so creative.
So when you're interpreting a story like Oliver Twist, there's so much that goes into it. And maybe a lot of people aren't familiar with the story. Can you tell us a little bit more about, Oliver, in that he was at heart a good kid in a bad situation?
Correct. He's actually a wonderful kid in a very bad situation. Oliver's mother died, and he was left at a parish mission where he was, not treated well. I mean, children that didn't have guardianship or didn't have anyone to look after them, it was a tough life. It was a really tough life. And while he's at the parish mission, they find a place for him with a local undertaker. And, he's a little boy, and it's frightening. I mean, here he is suddenly dressed in black in a little black hat, and he's having to walk at the head of a procession, a funeral procession. And then at night, he sleeps on a pallet underneath the coffins. So, this was brutal treatment for a young child. It was no wonder that he ran away to escape it. And that's where he encounters the artful dowager on the streets of London.
And it really is amazing when you look at the room, because you have a room that's set up to depict, you know, the funeral home. Talk to me about the work that went into and the little touches that are in that room.
Well, it's interesting because we have on loan from Historic Newcastle, our neighbor, a reproduction of a 19th century coffin that's covered in black fabric, and it has nail heads, and it's trimmed out with nail heads. And Brian selected everything in that room from the collection, from our collection, that had nail heads, from a sofa trimmed out in nail heads to a trunk trimmed out in nail heads. So there's a consistent theme through that entire room.
Absolutely. When you go in, it's dark, it's almost ominous, and really plays to that segment of the story.
Well, and he did research. He did a lot of research into that. He knew, you know, basically what it should look like. And then he researched our collection to provide him with the foundation for it. And where we are missing something, we fill in with loans from other museums and also from private collections.
So what happens to Oliver after he snatches the silk scarf?
Well, he tries to run away quickly, but he's caught and he has to appear before a magistrate. And Mr. Brownlow feels that he's so young that perhaps he can bring him home. He's sick, he's feverish, he's not well, and he takes him back to his house, which is quite a fabulous establishment. Mr. Brownlow's very wealthy, to take care of Oliver and nurse him back to health.
And then what happens after that?
Well, after that, they find out, Fagin and Bill Sykes, who is also in the story and is a thief that was trained and raised by Fagin, that he's been taken by Mr. Brownlow and that Mr. Brownlow is a man of serious means. And so they decide to kidnap Oliver back so that they can then rob Mr. Brownlow's house.
So it really is interesting, the twists and turns to the story.
It is. And there's a lot of depth and there's a lot of detail within all of Charles Dickens' stories. I mean, his descriptions are so vivid that you really feel like you're there, you're a part of the story. And that's what Brian zeroes in on.
So it's kind of like Dickens' interpretation of a problem that was happening in society. This was actually, some people theorize, written after an actual boy.
Right.
Is that right?
Yes. Could be. Yes.
Could be.
Yeah.
So it kind of like a look at something that, you know, maybe society doesn't necessarily want to see, but that needs to be addressed.
Right. Well, and Charles Dickens brought himself to these stories. As I said, he himself was the victim of poverty, and he was from a middle-class family. His family came on hard times, and his mother and father and he were put into a workhouse, and it was not pleasant. And so in all of his stories you have that thread.
Absolutely. Well, they say, write what you know.
Right,
so
exactly. And he knew. He had firsthand experience with it.
Excellent. And when we return, we're going to check out another chapter of Oliver Twist's Christmas at Historic Odessa. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Reggie Lynch, Associate Director of Interpretation and Engagement at Winnetor, and I'm just so thrilled to be here with the 302 talking about our Yuletide celebration.
Welcome back. We're at Historic Odessa talking about an Oliver Twist Christmas. I'm joined by Debbie Buxton to talk a little bit about the end of the story. Now, Debbie, last segment we left off where Oliver was taken in by this gentleman that he had taken a scarf from and shown a lot of generosity, which you have illustrated fully in a gorgeous bedroom downstairs.
Well, Oliver is very lucky that he decides to pick the pocket of Mr. Brownlow. Mr. Brownlow is not only a wealthy man, but he's a man with a good, warm heart. And he sees this little boy and he takes pity on him. The child is feverish. He's been dragged in front of the magistrate, and Mr. Brownlow asks to have him given into his care. And he takes him home to nurse him back to health, which he does. And Oliver is thriving in his beautiful, beautiful home. And then Mr. Brownlow and his friend Mr. Grimwig have a wager. Mr. Grimwig does not really believe that this street urchin can be rehabilitated. Mr. Brownlow needs to return books to the bookseller. So he sends Oliver on this trip to return the books with some money. But Mr. Brownlow and Mr. Grimwig have a wager. Will Oliver return? But Oliver never has a chance to return because by this time, Fagin and Bill Sykes are well aware of the fact that he's been taken into this wealthy household, and they have their eye on it for burglary. So they snatch him back.
I really like how you interpreted the wager. Just the two glasses there in the gorgeous living room. You really get a sense that those two men are seated there having this discussion. And when you look at the bedroom that Oliver has been blessed to have, the Christmas tree, the books, the food, really changes the dynamic, I think, from a boy who had nothing to a boy who was blessed with so much and on the edge of losing it.
Absolutely. But what we also don't know at that point of the story is that Brownlow's attraction to Oliver is something quite deep. And we don't know that Mr. Brownlow lost a daughter and a grandson.
Oh.
So there's a mystery here as well.
Absolutely. So the place that we are in now, this is Fagin's Den.
It is.
Talk to me a little bit about the interpretation, how you really brought that theme out.
Well, you'll notice all the scarves that are tied, the silk scarves. These are all the scarves that the children have picked from the pockets of unsuspecting souls. And they're really very good at what they do. And everybody remembers the Artful Dodger, who's a master pickpocket. So here they are. This is where Fagin keeps all these little orphan children that he grabs to train up to work for him. And they sleep in little beds and pallets on the floor. And they eat and they drink alcohol and they play card games. And they're doing all the things that you wouldn't want young children to be doing. And so we represent that at the table behind us, as well as all of the stolen goods that Fagin is preparing to fence. Because Fagin is really a fence. He takes all these stolen goods and then he sells them for money to other people. And Bill Sykes was one of his first criminals.
And you have a room that depicts Bill Sykes, his apartment?
We do. Bill Sykes' apartment, and that he lived in with Nancy, who was his girlfriend. And he steals, he does serious theft and burglary and breaks into houses. And he's the one who will break into Mr. Brownlow's with Oliver's help.
So Oliver goes to return the books, and what happens from there?
Fagin snatches him back off the street, and he and Bill Sykes prepare him to break into Mr. Brownlow's home.
And are they successful?
Yes, they are. They do get into the house, but they get caught. And actually, Bill Sykes, in trying to escape from Brownlow's house, falls off the roof.
And you have that depicted as well.
We do. There's a big rope hanging from the front of the Corbett house.
But there is a happy ending to this,
Yes,
right?
There is. It is also at that point that they realize that Oliver is actually Mr. Brownlow's long-lost grandson, that he is the child of his dear beloved daughter.
So it's a happy ending for everyone.
It's a happy ending for everyone.
Except for Mr. Sykes, who falls off the house.
Except for Mr. Sykes, who deservedly falls off the roof.
Absolutely. So I know a lot of work goes into, bringing this to life, and you certainly have done that. So, are you already thinking about next year? How do you select your theme, your piece of literature?
Well, ultimately, we leave that up to Brian, but we have lots of discussions about it at our January staff meeting, and everybody brings ideas to the table, and we get a lot of feedback from the public. We get suggestions from our public as well as to what they would like to see us take on. So it's a process. We go back and forth, and then in the end, Brian makes the final decision and sort of surprises the rest of us.
So how long does it take to dress out a story like this?
Well, it's a full year of research. He starts almost immediately, and we all assist in that as well. We're reading the story, and he goes through the collection carefully to be sure that he can recreate the story as accurately as possible. Because if we don't have the collection to support the story, then it's not something that we can do.
Sure, and I don't know if the folks at home can hear, but there are children on a tour right now. It kind of adds to the ambiance, so hopefully if they come out and they check out your interpretation, there'll be some kids here to kind of add to it.
Oh, we love kids. We love kids, and we welcome them. We have lots of school children and lots of families that visit Odessa.
Well, rightfully so. Debbie, thank you so much for sharing the house and the Oliver Twist Christmas with us. We appreciate it.
It's my great pleasure, and a Merry Christmas to all.
Merry Christmas. We'll be right back. For more information on any of the exhibits here at Historic Odessa, visit historicodessa.org. That'll do it for this week's episode of The 302. We're going to leave you now with a close-up look at a feather Christmas tree, which was all the rage in the early 19th century. Until next time, I'm Jackie Ferris. Tell them you saw it on The 302, and Merry Christmas.